Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Joanne Kenen, Politico's Executive Editor for Healthcare, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us for our Outside In event, and those of you on the live stream, too. Outside In is our event series that focuses on the intersection of healthcare and technology. And being Politico, we look at healthcare and technology through the lens of politics and policy. Outside In was conceived as a way to bring together outside experts and Washington insiders. This is our third year on this series, although our first event of this year. We have taken the idea one step further this year. We've created a forum of health tech industry insiders. You have a list of their names on your seat. And we're doing surveys, interviews, and events. And this group is helping us better understand the new opportunities and challenges that technological innovation is bringing to the healthcare policy world. Today, some of these panelists we'll have two panels, and some of these advisors are going to help us as we dig into the issue of medical privacy in an age of cybersecurity. What kind of congressional or regulatory action, if any, is needed to keep medical records safe? We'll have the conversation in two parts. First, Politico's e-health editor, Arthur Allen, and I will talk to these first panel of policymakers and policy experts about medical cybersecurity. In the second panel, Dan Diamond, a new colleague, he's writing Pulse for us now, and he's just begun the Pulse Check podcast that all of you have to subscribe to as soon as this is over. And he's also helped us create and moderate this Outside In advisory panel, this forum. And he will continue a conversation with experts who are on that forum. And you'll find Dan's stories from today, first story he's written, based on what these outside people are telling us. And the theme of that story shows how healthcare cybersecurity is getting worse and how the government's role is a mixed blessing. And we have a bar, as those of you who are here noticed. So stick around because the conversation can continue afterwards. Those of you in the live stream can just start right now. Before I introduce the panel to the stage, I want to take a minute to thank our partner Philips for their support of this event and the entire Outside Event series this year and all 3 years. Here to say a few words is Artie Arthur, Vice President, Healthcare Government Solutions Group from Philips.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for coming to this event. We're really excited to be here. Thank you to Politico for sponsoring the first installment of Outside In. This is Philips' third year here, and just to give you a little bit of an understanding of what we did last year and how it's really going to integrate into how healthcare and technology meet each other for this series. Last year, we focused on areas such as digital medicine, aging in a technology world, and also population health. Why does that matter today? Well, you know what? Healthcare transformation is continuing on, right? And what we need to do is ensure that that data is meaningful and actionable. But the worst part about it, and the reason why we're here today, is because we don't always know if it's safe, right? I mean, you don't know what you're going to get. And you guys have that sheet of paper, I just read it real briefly, on how expensive health data is. So we're here tonight to really talk about how important it is to ensure that our health data is secure. Hackers don't care. They don't discriminate at all amongst health data. If you think about what's happening today, you've seen a lot of articles on the healthcare ecosystem. Large healthcare systems, as well as insurance companies, have had their data attacked, whether it's by a hacker or any type of outside threat. And that's important, and it's scary. I think the really cool thing about working for Philips and why I'm so proud to be here tonight is that we take this very seriously. In fact, my group in the healthcare space for the federal market, we've done a lot of work with DoD. In fact, most of our products today have been certified by the Department of Defense for cybersecurity, and we're really proud of that. We have more cybersecurity certifications than any other entity today. Additionally, we get to be an advisor on the newly formed cybersecurity task force for HHS. And so this is really empowering what we do in healthcare today. I can't tell you how excited and thankful I am for the panel that we have tonight and for Politico to partner with us in this forward-thinking, thought-provoking series of 2016. And with that, I think I'd like to introduce your panel.
Okay, thank you, Artie, and thank you to Philips for your partnership. For those of you in the room and those of you on livecast, our conversation on Twitter, we use the hashtag #OutsideIn. That's one word, outside in. I have a tablet on stage. I'll take some questions from those of you who tweet them in. A reminder, our events are live streamed. They are all on the record, and they are recorded so people can watch them later on through our website. Without any further delay, I would like to welcome our panelists and my co-moderator to the stage. First, we've got Representative Will Hurd from Texas. He is the chairman of the IT subcommittee for Oversight and Government Reform, and he is a former CIA undercover officer. And then in the private sector, he was a cybersecurity expert. He came to Congress in 2015, and he swiftly has emerged as a really important voice on this topic on privacy and security and looking at where the government is not doing a good enough job. Leslie Krigstein is the Vice President of Congressional Affairs at CHIME, which is the College of Healthcare Information Management Executives. She brings the concerns of healthcare CIOs and health IT leaders to the Hill and to the agencies. Devin McGraw is the Deputy Director for Health Information Privacy at the HHS Office of Civil Rights, and she is the point person at HHS for concerns about privacy, and she helps enforce HIPAA, so you all have to behave. Clinton Mikel, he is a partner at the Health Law Partners, Chairman of eHealth Privacy and Security Interest Group at the American Bar Association's Health Law section. And he is one of the top national experts in legal issues that barely existed a couple of years ago. And we hope he can help us understand what's still needed in the legislative or regulatory framework to protect healthcare privacy, because every day we are reminded that it is a problem. And of course, Arthur Allen, my friend, colleague, and our eHealth editor in the office, they call him Big Data, and I'm Little Data. Thank you. Arthur, you're going to take it. You're going to start it.
So I I'm the CEO of a small hospital chain, and I've been busy taking care of meaningful use and dealing with MACRA and a million other things. And somebody just came to me and said that there's this issue called cybersecurity, like the problems with people attacking the healthcare system. And I'm going to just ask our distinguished guests here to explain some of these things. Congressman Hurd, who is attacking the healthcare system and what are they after?
The majority of it is going to be organized crime. You know, a lot of it is Russian organized crime. They're the ones that are trying to leverage the data they're collecting for monetary gain. A health record gets more on the black market, on the digital black market, than a financial record. And some even estimate that a Medicare record is in a couple of hundreds of dollars per record. So it's lucrative financially. To give some context, in 2012 alone, FBI had some data that there was $414 million worth of thefts in the United States. And the estimates in the cyber realm, it was over $100 billion, right? It's impact to our economy, so it's a big issue.
So it's a good field to be in, obviously. Leslie, tell me about the experience that hospital CIOs are having dealing with this problem. Are hospital systems spending a lot more money? What are they doing to adjust to this new reality?
And you're right, it is the reality. There's only so many fingers to plug the holes, and the reality is we can find every possible vulnerability and try to block it, and they only have to find one. And so when you're looking at health IT as a small fraction of the overall health system budget, something like 3.5% to 4%, a subset of that is IT security. So it's something that you're not necessarily getting reimbursed for, but it's absolutely necessary for the public good. But it's tough. Resources are hard to come by, whether it be financial or even personnel. And you're only as strong as your weakest link. And in this day and age, we're sharing data with more and more partners. We're sharing data directly with patients, and you're just opening up the doors. And so it's incumbent to, train your workforce and work with your boards. But it's definitely a tough fight that the odds are stacked against us.
Devin, so you're the sort of the cop on this beat, in a way. How much do you blame, how do you figure out how much, or how does the legal structure share the blame, decide who's going to be punished, how much you punish people who are really, in a way, the victims of the crime. I mean, because hospital healthcare systems, to be sure, they're the custodians of their records, but they're also the ones who are directly being attacked. So how do you, at the same time, punish and at the same time, try to improve the system to make it more secure?
Well, so we have a set of expectations with respect to security in healthcare, and they're absolutely critical. I mean, it is a sunk cost of doing business. If you're going to be out there collecting health data, it's valuable. Not only is it valuable to criminals, but it should be valuable to you. It's probably one of your most critical business assets. So protecting that data from the threats that are out there is really it should be expected, and frankly, from a public policy perspective, it's important for patients to be able to trust that their data is safeguarded. Not necessarily perfectly safeguarded, but safeguarded. We do not expect perfection. If you take a look at the cases that we have pursued, those entities, in our view, based on our investigations, had significant deficiencies in their security policies, processes. They were not doing enterprise-wide risk assessments, or maybe they did one like 10 years ago and it hadn't been updated. The adoption of basic security safeguards is slow. So I'm not suggesting that we have a right to demand perfection in terms of accountability, but we do expect entities to devote resources to security. We do expect them to be aware of security resources. You, as the CEO of that hospital, if they're coming to you and you don't know what cybersecurity is, that's a big problem.
Okay. Clinton, what do you think? Is OCRs, are they exercising their role appropriately? Are they being too harsh, too lenient? And do you think that sort of the regulatory and legal framework needs to change in order to deal with this problem that's rather quickly kind of arisen in healthcare?
No, I think OCR is doing a really good job.
You're not in a good seat, are you?
No, I'm not. So, in case I have a client, Devin. No, I think OCR is doing a great job, and one of the stated purposes they have is to essentially teach. And they have a really strained budget for their teaching. But you will see them issuing technical assistance as opposed to being punitive. Now, we have a lot of agencies in the government that are punitive in the healthcare sector. OCR is not one of them, thankfully. And they've done a good job, I think, with splashing out their enforcement actions, pursuing some big dollars, so that people in the industry see it as a deterrent effect and will also take it seriously. And they've hit business associates, they've hit covered entities, laboratories, hospitals, physician practices. So I think they've done a great job. Now, as far as the regulatory framework, I've really only seen one truly bipartisan proposal so far. And I think it's workable. So we take the servers and we put them in the bathroom closet. And then we build a wall around them, and we make the hackers pay for it.
I see.
But,
Okay.
but
Good.
to
We're looking for solutions, so I'm glad
But
you
to pile on there, if you're the CEO of a hospital and you're looking to OCR for guidance, you're already behind the curve, right?
Absolutely.
You need to be, and no offense to OCR, you need to be following the best practices in good digital system hygiene. And if you're not doing that, the regulatory environment is not going to save you. And the fact that the CEO should know about these things, because this is an integral part of your business, and you need to make sure that you have a CIO that knows what they're doing in order to protect that infrastructure, because that's your responsibility to protect the information of the people that you have in your systems.
Right.
When there's a ransomware and there's a headline and it makes news, I mean, 5 or 6 years ago, when there was a breach, it was always, the breach that at least the public heard about, it was always somebody spying on a movie star in Hollywood, right? That's what we thought, and I sort of thought, well, I'm not Sharon, I'm not having plastic surgery, I don't have to worry. But that's how I think a lot of us sort of came across it. It was nosiness and internal lack of internal controls. Now we really have some kind of organized crime, cyber crime, going after health because the health data is valuable on so many different levels. But are these, occasional things we read about in the newspaper with the bitcoins and the ransom, is it occasional, or is it happening all the time and we don't know about it?
I mean, to pipe up in talking to CIOs, a small hospital in rural America, 300-bed community hospital, was victim or attempted 3,500 attacks on Sunday, on Mother's Day. They faced 90% of them were internal from the US, 10% of them were external from countries from China to Costa Rica.
But the internal ones actually, do we know that they're internal or?
From the US, I should say.
But I mean, do we know that that's really where they're, rather than?
Yeah, they're able to track the,
Okay.
Where the threats are coming from. But that's a 300-bed hospital in rural America. And so if they're facing it, think about like an academic medical center that has IP. Or think about, as we're starting to exchange, and just the number of opportunities for intrusion. So you may have, or to give you another example, there's a large health system on the East Coast, $10 billion health system. They turned away 1 million ransomware emails in the month of March. So the attempts are regular. They're happening to providers large and small across the country. And it's a matter of making sure that you've trained your staff properly to say no to them. But there's also times where, as long as you've got your, incident response plan in place, you should have those systems backed up. And so if they hit one computer, hopefully that computer's useless, you've got your systems back up, there's absolutely no need to even consider the ransom. So it's a matter of having your best practices. So
And how common is it that they have those best practices in place?
it's a work in progress. It's very definitely a learning curve.
She's shaking her head, so.
Sorry. They're trying, is the reality. Our industry is rapidly becoming more digital, and we are trying to keep pace with the progression that everyone is making while meeting patient expectations. But the reality is the threats are real, they are regular, and it's a matter of being up to snuff and working with OCR and looking at the NIST cybersecurity framework and sharing threat indicators across the industry, which to date is not as regular as it could be as other industries. And so I think we've seen some very significant progress, particularly in what the Hill did last year in setting up the cyber task force and setting up the framework to share threat intelligence, because that's the only way the small critical access hospital in rural America is going to be able to leverage their lessons learned from their colleagues.
And CEOs.
What are you hearing as a lawmaker who has access to some information that I don't have?
Well, there are more attacks than what we are aware of, and more people are paying the ransom than what is out there and for public consumption.
Widespread more,
it's
or a little bitty more?
More than it's more than little bitty.
And a lot of bitty?
Somewhere in between, right? So folks need to recognize that and understand that the threat is real, that everybody is potentially a target, and if you don't have, and if as an attacker, you're looking for the person in the lowest hanging fruit, right? The person that hasn't had their information backed up, that are using out-of-date software to defend their infrastructure. So that's who you're going to go after. And if you think you're the right one, then you're the person that's probably going to get targeted.
So I'm comfortable giving it a widespread. And it's widespread and it's underreported. And lots of folks are paying the ransom.
And how much?
Are these ransom attacks, from the looks of it, some of them are random. In other words, somebody's sending out bugs and they happen to land in a hospital. Are any of them, have the ransomwareists figured out specifically how to target a hospital? Because they must realize the hospital's kind of got to pay if they want to.
Well, if you look at the studies and the reports out there, 2016 is really predicted to be the tipping point for ransomware becoming mainstream in the healthcare industry, because folks are seeing that, yes, the hospitals will pay good money, more so than your individual or even your law firm that gets hit with it. And a lot of it is random, but I think it will become more targeted. And it's not just our organized crime. I mean, there was a hospital in Flint, Michigan that was hit somewhat related to the water crisis. And it was a hacktivist type scenario.
I see.
the way this appears to be playing out is very much a crime of opportunity. And so the healthcare industry, clearly there's vulnerabilities that the hackers have perceived, and they're going for it. And I think that Leslie put her finger right on it when she said, the lack of contingency planning and data backup always has been part of the HIPAA security rule, but I think to the extent people didn't realize how important that was, they sure should know that now.
But so Devin, are you saying then that if people are reading a few rules and they're reading your guidelines and they've looked at HIPAA's, security guidelines, that some person in the middle of Nebraska with 300 beds is as ready to deal with this threat as partners?
Loaded question.
I mean,
My lawyer is advising me.
I mean, can you really defend yourself if you're a small player and you don't have a lot of resources?
Well, look, we've already put out there that entities need to do contingency planning and disaster planning. In fact, if you're in the middle of rural America, your systems could be hit by a tornado and disabled, right? So we have an expectation out there and always have that there is to be contingency planning. The HIPAA security rule is flexible and scalable. We do not necessarily have the same expectations of small facilities that we would for larger ones that are larger resourced. But at the same time, this is a threat now that I think everyone should be aware of. And if you don't have the contingency planning in place, you're a target if you're not already being targeted. And having that in place will arm you so much better to be able to resist something like this. You're either going to pay for security or you might be paying for ransom. But you don't get out of this without putting some resources at this problem.
Is the security something that's, a lot of the small rural hospitals, they've had a lot of demands on them.
Yes.
It's not blaming on Obamacare. There's some real there are issues that many complicated issues facing rural hospitals, and the health IT has been one. I don't want to use the word burden. Financially, it's a burden. It has been hard. Is the security so expensive that they're going to go under? They're going to have to consolidate. They're going to lose their independence. How is it sort of a straw that broke the camel's back for the smaller practices in the smaller rural hospitals, or the smaller that don't have to be rural, but that's the category that has a lot of trouble. Can you do this? Can you fix it if you're not a giant?
No, I don't think it's even limited to the small rural hospitals or the small hospitals. Hospitals are financially taxed, and IT security is hard, and it's ever evolving. Like Leslie said, they only have to find one hole, and we have a world to deal with. So I think absolutely hospitals are under great financial strain these days, and there's not really good money allocated towards securing this. So I think if you peer into the dark minds of a lot of hospital executives, they're rolling the dice with where they allocate their budget, and it's a matter of surviving as a hospital.
Leslie, what's your take on that?
You're right. It's something that your budget's finite, and you're going to get incentive payments or take penalties from the federal government for any number of reasons. That's your market basket, how you're going to dictate getting paid, and security is not a line item on there. But the reality is, we don't have a choice. We're going to scrape together every penny. It might mean you don't get a new MRI system. It might mean you don't hire as many new nurses or doctors. The reality is, the fines that you're going to take, or you're not willing to risk your reputation or your business, because as Arthur, you asked, are they targeting health systems? Yes, they are. First it was just the data, but now they've recognized, hey, if we disrupt their operations, we can put them out of business. They have to turn away patients. And then their name's going to be all over the headlines. And so there really is an inevitability that you have to address this, regardless of what your budget looks like. So it's working with the boards. It's creating security teams. If you're a small practice, you're scraping together with your colleagues and hiring consultants to help. It's just the world we're living in today.
What are you hearing as a government official? Just want to scream?
Look, if you have a network that can be attacked, then you need to array your network properly, right? If you take the financial incentive away from the attackers, where your data is not all in one place that can be captured and held to pay the ransom, then you take the financial motivation away from the attacker to go after it, right? And so look, there's a building this nice somewhere in Moscow that has hundreds of hackers that are developing the next software, and they're learning from all the attacks that they've done, and they're looking for targets of opportunities. They get a pretty good payoff, so they're going to learn more and be like, hey, how many other people fit that mold? And then they're going to be a little bit more targeted, and instead of doing phishing, they're going to do spear phishing, which is targeting an individual. But if you have the network, make sure you're doing the very basics to protect yourself. And sometimes it's going to cost more, but if you're relying on the government to defend yourself, then you have a much larger problem.
But can't we expect the government to do more to defend us? I mean, we can't defend against nuclear attack by ourselves. So
fair.
I mean, sorry, terrible comparison. But I mean, is there more that the Pentagon or somebody like that could be doing to interfere with some of this stuff? So
one of the things that the federal government can be doing is sharing tactics, techniques, and procedures more with with entities or with the information sharing groups that they can get that out to the rest of the community. And that is an area where if what the attack over the horizon is or other industries are being focused, understanding what that is so you can array your limited resources against the most immediate threats, right? And so I think that can't happen.
We're all in the healthcare world, and that's what we focus on, but if we were a bunch of bankers, would we be having this conversation, or have they solved it?
No, it's the same
It's
problem.
the same problem.
Is healthcare worse, or are we just, those of us in the room are paying more attention to it?
No, I mean, we talked about this before. There's a perceived vulnerability out there, and the hackers are going for it. And we know this now. If we didn't know it before, I suspect Leslie's been hearing about it for a long time. This is certainly, the vulnerability of the healthcare system is not necessarily news to us either.
Right.
So, I mean, there is work to do to shore up what is an important national asset, which is this data that really is critical to the healthcare system. We have a role to play with respect to HIPAA, where we put out guidance for small providers to help them with the basic security expectations. We're currently working on some additional guidance on ransomware to try to help entities to get ahead of this. It's going to focus very much on the contingency planning issue that Leslie raised, but also some of the tips that have come out about how you might be able to detect it before it happens. But nevertheless, it's absolutely not an issue that we can ignore. We don't deal with punishing criminal behavior. So, we're doing what we can to try to help the entities who we regulate to try to meet this threat and creating a set of expectations with respect to how they meet the threat. But I do think there could be some more that we could be doing on a national level on the criminal aspect of all of this. Easy for me to say because I don't do that work, but this is criminal behavior with respect to the hacking piece of it.
And is that on the agenda adequately with law enforcement?
Is it on the agenda adequately? So law enforcement is looking to do everything it can to help the private sector, no matter what the industry is, defend themselves. Does law enforcement, whether it's a Department of Homeland Security or FBI or Secret Service, have enough resources to help everybody across these industries? No. But that's why the importance of the ISACs, where you have industries come together to share, and the legislation we passed last year is going to help facilitate that. But we got to make sure the federal government is passing and sharing information. One thing that I hear a lot from healthcare providers is that there's a bunch of old and antiquated rules and regulations that is confusing, and they don't know what they're supposed to do, what does meaningful use mean, and all this kind of stuff. So these are some issues that need to be streamlined as well, so that healthcare providers know exactly what they should be protecting.
And I think there was an element as well, and this passed as part of CISA. We heard from our members in terms of looking directly at HHS and not just at law enforcement, but just within HHS, there are so many different entities that have different responsibilities in this space. So the FDA approves medical devices. Are those medical devices secure? OCR covers HIPAA. How does HIPAA intervene with the NIST framework? And that requires some interagency coordination. And you're looking at ONC and how they're certifying electronic health records. Are they certified with enough security from the beginning? And so as we're looking kind of even within HHS, and something that we asked and we're really pleased that ended up being included, was a directive for HHS to kind of line up who's running point on this issue and how can we, look to the agency and get a singular answer. And I would say more than that, we've noticed this shift. Traditionally, we were looking at privacy and security, unfortunately, as two separate things in healthcare. And I think until we recognize that the privacy of the data absolutely is an element of security and patients have the right to know their data is secure, that's going to be a game changer, I think.
So do you think we need to appoint a health cybersecurity czar who runs the whole? No.
No, I think, we're waiting. HHS, I believe, was given a year to put forth this interagency plan. Mm-hmm. And so I think when we see the results of that, I think it will really help in terms of knowing who to go to within the agency. But I think that was a great addition that I'm not sure if, the rest of the world caught, but it was in the range of things that were healthcare specific that passed with CISA.
We're all thinking about this in terms of our personal information and the threat to, many of us in this room have had our information hacked, whether we know it or not, right? Maybe everybody. But this is a big data question, but but we're also at the sort of a brink of, we're talking about using data in lots of really interesting, potentially really helpful ways, right? We're talking about patient-generated data. All the things that we've been talking about are outside in for 2 years. I mean, there are really cool things happening. Patients, the way that we participate in clinical trials and the more patient engagement, patient pushing data. Arthur can talk about the cohort from Precision Medicine. There's so much going on that requires use of health IT way more than just turning your paper chart onto a computer chart.
So how are we going to let that data how's it going to flow when we
can't protect it? Yeah.
Well, getting away from the data flow part.
Which doesn't flow all that well, right?
I think Devin will have something to say about that. Or not.
Beyond there's the interoperability issue, but there's also the, say we have the magic wand, we get everything interoperable tomorrow and people unlock things and all those other issues. So we've got this, in the next few years, we're supposed to be able to exchange data and produce data from in ways that we couldn't do before. And it has an amazing amount of potential. But is the privacy thing or the security thing, since you just told me they're two different things, how much in the way is that going to be?
Well, I think this illustrates why healthcare is actually a much scarier place to be in than the financial industry, which is much further ahead than hospitals, health systems, anyone in the healthcare industry. Because when we're talking about ransomware, we're talking about data, we're talking about patient safety. What keeps a lot of us up at night, especially on the IT subcommittee, is not necessarily the known quantity of stealing patient data, but it's all the other inputs that go into that. It's the networked medical devices. It's the networked anesthesia machine. It's the temperature and the air saturation in the OR.
So you're talking about the Dick Cheney scenario.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Homeland. Right.
He got widely mocked for that, but he was onto something.
Yeah.
So
Has it happened already?
I don't think it has.
Not that we've heard.
Somebody's actual pacemaker hasn't been hacked, but there have been many demonstrations of how to hack a pacemaker, right? But some people talked about the attack on a utility grid was philosophical, but that happened recently. The Russians attacking the grid in the Ukraine. So saying it's not, it's possible. It's outside the world of theoretical. But those fears shouldn't prevent us from moving towards interoperability. I own that data. That's my data, and I want to be able to pull it up on a dashboard and figure out what happened the last couple of doctor's visits. And I want to make sure my future doctor has access to this stuff. You know, and let's say we can anonymize that data, we can protect privacy to make sure that we have true interoperability, so we can detect Zika faster. We can, you know, make sure that medicine is being developed on a quicker basis. We can do all those things, but when we do, we increase our surface area of attack.
Well, and that's one of the reasons why the HIPAA rules are not just about security, it's also about availability and data integrity, right? Because always, those regulations have presumed that the data has no value until it's used appropriately and as often as necessary and needed. And that's why the rules are built the way they are. So it's never going to be, well, we can have this or we can have that, right? We got to figure out how to have both.
We are going to have time for.
But if you're a provider, don't you think the instinct is going to be to shut down, you know, to not send your information through a health information exchange because you're not sure that all the players there have good security?
So something, if you're talking to a CIO or a Chief Information Security Officer, is they'll often say, unfortunately, there's no set rules of the road in terms of security. So the NIST framework is a great starting point, and we've heard that there's a healthcare-specific guidance coming, which we're excited about, but in reality, it's optional. We're not saying we want more mandates, but the reality is if there's either an industry-led effort or some place to look for standards, it's going to be really valuable to know that if you're engaging with another provider or you're engaging with the health information exchange, that they've got a set level of security that then you can deem, okay, they follow this or they've done that, so I know that I can share with them and I should be okay. And so I think we're coming together as an industry and starting those conversations. But if you ask, there is a desire for a minimum set of requirements that you can build on top of, but the expectation, hopefully someday, that we will all be at one point that we have some level of confidence to embark on that sharing.
We are going to be able to take a couple of questions before we go to the other panel, and I want to start. Actually, Darius is, where are you? We have a reporter, Darius Tahir, is in the room, and he's probably sitting right. Where you go? Okay. He's one of our reporters, and he shouldn't.
Oh dear.
So what we always hear in these cybersecurity discussions is how valuable the sort of stolen records are. I was wondering if there are any efforts to track what these records are being used for and how extensively they might be used for being leveraged for financial gain.
Anybody want to take that on?
Well, I think the only thing I'll say is that, I mean, it isn't part of sort of our purview to track sort of where it goes after sort of we get a breach report, for example, and our investigation will take a look at what happened during the breach and do we have some significant issues of lack of compliance with the rules that we have to pay attention to. But one of the things that I've definitely seen is a connection between medical identity theft and fraud, and the increase in healthcare fraud that is out there, and the ties between security and strengthening healthcare security and helping to combat fraud.
So we've been able
security.
to track. This record was stolen in this Anthem hack, and later that same number that was stolen on that record ended up in this fraud case. I mean, has that been done? I mean, because that's what the cause and effect would be clear.
Well, the fraud units.
We need to put a
within-
tracer
yeah.
on data so that we can figure out where it
Right.
goes, right?
Well, the fraud units that are involved in whether it's a big insurance company or the government are the ones that would be seeing the impact that it's having, and they should be keeping track of that data. And I think that's something that would be interesting to see within the health sector, ISAC, on the kinds of things that they're seeing, where that data is going.
Right.
There was a question right over here. Can we bring the
Should I wait for the mic?
mic over here to the front row? Do we have?
I can project, that's fine.
No, we got a mic.
Sure, okay. Steve Luckett, I work and study in the city. At the outset, thank you very much to the political team, Alexis, Mike, Rodney, shooting photographs here in the city. I guess first to the congressman, there'll be three quick ones. How do you deem your efforts, or the efforts by your colleagues, in bringing forth a cyber security protocol The second is, have you received either from Capitol Police, FBI, any of the other organizations, notice about having your own or your peers' medical information hacked? And the elephant in the room is casualty. So what about the insurance companies that, to the extent that a lot of their patients get hacked, could be facing a very serious, massive class action suit? And thanks.
The first question, look, the oversight role of Congress to make sure that we're providing performance, standards rather than trying to bake something into a law is important, because the reality is as soon as we say this is a best practice, it's going to change in 6 months. And so we have to create legislation that's flexible and grows with the times. And that's where you talk about performance. What should the outcomes be? I'm not aware of anything dealing with individual members being their health information being targeted. And the last one?
The liability of insurers.
Oh, liability.
Oh, look, absolutely. I think this is something that everybody's looking at. This is a question that insurance companies are looking at major breaches, whether it's at retailers or banks. What is the insurance aspect to a major breach? And when it comes to the health industry, it's going to be huge. And I don't think there's any answers on how to deal with that yet.
Well, when we were planning this panel, and we thought, who should we have? And we thought, well, maybe the American Bar Association has somebody looking at this. So we went to the website, and we found not only do they have somebody looking at it, they've got an entire newish section on e-health and data and all this. And you tell me there were, 1,400 lawyers already in something that really didn't exist. When did you start the section?
About 6-7 years ago.
Okay, well, I think that sort of tells you something about the magnitude and the growing magnitude. A couple of quick takeaways, because we're going to need to get rid of this panel so we can start the other one. Dan will be out here in a minute. Before we wrap up, Arthur and I will each think of a quick takeaway. I guess my takeaway is that this is a bigger problem than most people realize, and probably a bigger problem than I realized coming in, that it's massive and pervasive, and that we're not going to have, none of us as individuals really can protect ourselves, and it is not going to be solved within the next year. Arthur?
Yeah, and I think that it's just going to be another, I think we've heard here that this is just going to be sort of another pressure on the healthcare sector, parts of which have a lot of financial and other strains, and unfortunately this was an unforeseen consequence of, I think, unforeseen by most, of the meaningful use program and the effort to get, the needed effort to get computers into medical offices, and so
there was such a push to get
that's
the adoption of the electronic health record that there wasn't enough.
But people didn't. I think most people didn't foresee that suddenly that it was going to make the healthcare system vulnerable in a new way.
A whole new breed of bad guys.
Although I think there probably were some who did.
Okay.
Anyway, any other closing thoughts?
I think one thing that bears repeating is we hear a lot about how you need the board to get involved and you need senior leadership on this. One important thing to remember about healthcare, and specifically hospitals in our country, is the board of even a large hospital is not necessarily the type of board you would think would exist for an entity of that size. About 59% of the hospitals in this country are nonprofits. So you have donors, you have political influence. 23% of them are state and local entities. So it's hard sometimes just with the dynamics of the board leadership.
Interesting.
Right.
A little different industry.
I don't want to say that hacking isn't, and cyber crime isn't worth singularly paying attention to. It absolutely is. But I think we risk getting attracted to the shiny object when good basic security should be the platform upon which all of this gets built, and we're not even really there yet for many entities, and we have to figure out a way to get there.
Okay, well, I need to wrap up the conversation.
Quick
Yeah.
point. Sorry.
You have to talk as fast as me.
Don't click on links and suspicious emails.
There you go.
That's why my husband doesn't answer mine, right? It's time to wrap up the conversation. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your insights. And I'm going to welcome Dan Diamond from Pulse, he's helped to put together the forum, and the next panel will take over. And then stay afterwards, continue talking, and drink.
Seamlessly, come on. Great job. Yeah. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you,
Alexis.
Phillips. I'm excited to join the Outside In team. My role here, in addition to writing Pulse and doing the Pulse Check podcast, is moderating the Outside In forum. And you'll see on your seats the first story that we've published as part of that forum. I've even got it here if you haven't seen. Polling insiders on what they think are the biggest cybersecurity challenges and the role that government can and should play. I do want to welcome our three panelists as I sit on this high chair. First, a man who needs no introduction, though I'm going to give him one anyway, Aneesh Chopra, co-founder and executive vice president of Hunch Analytics. He also spent years providing leadership on IT issues in the White House, and once upon a time worked at the advisory board company. And then Nick Dawson, executive director of Sibley Hospital's Innovation Hub, better known as the Innovation Czar. As long as I've known Nick, which is going on 10 years, he's been one of the most thoughtful thinkers on sharing healthcare information online. And last, but and certainly not least, Nia Miragi, fellow with Brookings Institute's Center for Technology Innovation. He studied this issue very closely, and it's especially timely to have you, Nia, because you just did a report Thursday, last week, on cybersecurity and some of the biggest issues plaguing the sector. I have questions for the three of you, but I actually wanted to start by taking the temperature of the room. Simple question, show of hands. Is cybersecurity getting worse in healthcare? Show of hands. Okay, only about half the room. Is it getting better? Is cybersecurity safer than it was? I'm going to turn to you guys. Aneesh, is cybersecurity worse than it used to be?
So I'm going to answer this question with the typical caveat, which is yes, in the following context. We were in manila folders 5 years ago, 8 years ago. And so when you've increased the spread of digital records, by definition, you've created more of an attack vector on which there can be more risk. So relative to manila folders, I would say the cybersecurity risk is higher. But on the flip side of it, if you take a look at the preponderance of the data on where the cybersecurity risks have come from, the non-certified health IT systems are where the preponderance of the attacks seem to be. So if you kind of just take the practical nature of this, data in many databases that have been sold in the commercial sector, banking sector, healthcare sector, databases that people can log into and have access to that someone who does convince me to click on a malicious link might expose. But the systems that are regulated, the certified systems that were subsidized under the Meaningful Use Program, for some reason have been less prevalent among the list of sites that have been. That doesn't mean that they're perfect and they're safe. It just, if you looked at the evidence, the overwhelming share of attacks have been in the uncertified system. So I'd say worse, but in context.
And let's come back to the certified point, but maybe move down the line. Nick, cybersecurity, you're at a provider organization. Have things gotten better or worse from your perspective?
Yeah, I was all prepared to take a very contrarian view, and I just want to point out when I got here, I was given a beer and shown this very comfortable chair in the back, and if I take that contrarian view and it means I can never come back, then I'm willing to adjust my point of view.
Well, how much alcohol have you had? Because we were hoping you'd actually go full throttle.
It's a bell curve. We'll see what happens here. I would actually probably echo those sentiments. I think, just by virtue of the fact that we've become digital very aggressively, very quickly, it increases a attack surface. I think there's also the pragmatic reality that threats have been there for networks for years and years and years, and this is a hot topic and a timely one for our industry for some really well-known examples.
Sure.
And things we just heard of, I don't know that necessarily means the sky is falling, per se. And then, I think from a provider organization standpoint, we're wrestling with a reality of, is this really the business we want to be in and know how to be in? Do we know how to staff for it? Do we know how to fight these kinds of things. We've kind of convinced ourselves that we have to be all things to all people. We have to be a food service delivery and an architecture firm and a leasing organization and a provider organization and a research organization, but this might be an area that we're significantly focused on, and so we think it's a hot pressing topic, but we might want to re-examine that.
So, Niam.
So I think I agree with the panel. The frequency of these cyber attacks are becoming lower, primarily because healthcare is becoming more mature in IT, just like any other industry. When you're younger, you're more likely to have accidents while driving. As you get used to it and you learn how to drive, the likelihood of accidents become less. So that is the case for healthcare as well.
So just to make sure that I'm pulling out that point, you think we actually might be trending in the right direction?
Yes.
As healthcare matures, things are getting safer.
Correct. And the other thing is that I think these recent ransomware attacks are the best thing that could ever happen for healthcare security, because they now let people know about the importance of cybersecurity in the medical domain. Cybersecurity and health IT is no longer an overhead for the hospital managers. It has now become an integral part of their services. Now they have realized that if they do not invest enough on cybersecurity and IT, it's going to hurt their main core operational businesses. So I think now that these recent ransomware attacks have created this awareness, healthcare providers would have much more business incentives to invest on cybersecurity and ensuring patient privacy, just like other businesses do.
So one of those ransomware attacks, we heard about it on the first panel. I think probably everyone in this room knows the MedStar attack, where hackers held hostage a 10-hospital system right up the corner from us, asking for bitcoins to release the information back, and hospital executives basically had to cancel patient visits. Nick, you are not at MedStar, but you are at a MedStar rival. So I'm curious, as an executive of a hospital watching this happen, what were the meetings like in the boardrooms at Sibley to make sure that you are not the next MedStar?
I don't know if it's a direct quote. I think there was probably a conversation that started with, "What's a Bitcoin?" And I think that's not throwing stones in my own house. I think that's probably a conversation that anybody would have, right? So my point there is the notion is really esoteric, right? The notion of being held crypto ransom, right? So there's a whole set of education we have to have, and I heard some of that in the first panel around what is this stuff, what is the real impact, what's a threat versus reality, and that's a case where there was actual reality, not just a threat. So the first part of it starts with unpacking what's really happening, what's our real risk, what's the mitigation of that risk, meaning like time to figure it out ourselves, to restore from backup if it's a possibility, to come up with a different solution versus the cost of just paying it. And sometimes that cost of paying it is cheaper than waiting to try to figure out another plan if there is another plan. So I think that's part of it. I think for us, and instead of pontificating on what happened in the boardroom, I have not been privy to that conversation, but I'll tell you what our team, the innovation team, starts to talk about is how do we think about this in a different way? So not in the sense that, although there was the suggestion we should start mining Bitcoin and have like a stockpile. But
yet another business for hospitals to go into.
The
right? Architecture firm and the food service.
Yeah, we made our margin on Bitcoin this year. I think instead it's thinking, how do we not have a single point of failure? How do we not look at, and so our team got together and we said, well, what's going on here? And we said, well, it seems like the IT infrastructure and really the EMR, because it's increasingly become the piece that does the billing and the medication delivery and the admit and discharge and everything in between, is the operating system of the hospital. And how do we not have that become a single point of failure? So we started talking about different types of mitigations. And that was kind of where we took it.
And I feel like that plays right into what Aneesh was saying initially. Which systems are most vulnerable? Certified systems not? Could you elaborate on that?
Well, I mean, I'm not suggesting that one is particularly better than the other, but I would say the certified systems have at least embodied a lot more of the best practices into the regulatory framework. So there's actually a fairly basic understanding of how do you encrypt information at rest and in motion, and how do you ensure there's a user authentication process so that if Dan Diamond logs in, I know it's Dan Diamond, not a machine pretending to be Dan Diamond. So we've got a little bit more of these testing capabilities to make sure that the software sold to the organizations can meet a certain bar, and that bar gets better every cycle. Whereas the broader systems that are just available that you can buy anywhere really haven't gone through that level of review. So as a consumer protection matter, if you're the head of purchasing at Sibley or whomever, you may not know that this particular outsourced vendor that does your billing and collections, that gets the entire patient file to make sure that the copays are collected for the $20 that are missed, that entity has some cybersecurity best practices and hygiene to the standards that are seen among the certified technology pieces that are made available in the electronic health record program. So my perspective is we're getting better. It's an interesting point about healthcare. I'll make this observation about getting better. The whole framework for cybersecurity was we'd have a learning industry model. That is to say, there's more disclosure of breaches, which would then inform root cause analysis to say, now we know where the vulnerabilities are, let's close that loop in the next round, and that we'd have this much more transparent system, collaborative system. Healthcare is actually further ahead than the rest of the industry verticals because part of the HITECH Act was to create a framework that required that breach notification and that disclosure. So we're actually benefiting. We're certainly saying, wow, a lot of attacks in healthcare. It's one of the few sectors that's required to report the breaches. Not every other sectors, So we're benefiting in many ways because we're bringing to life, we're shining light on these holes, and that leads to a loop where we get better and better over time. That's at least my perspective on how the systems evolve.
I like that learning system perspective. I want to go back to one quick point and get kind of nerdy about it for a second. I think what I'm hearing, and
this is a good crowd, by the way, to get nerdy.
Cool.
So I give you the blessing.
This is a marginally informed comment. I want to preface it with that. But what I'm hearing is that the specific attack vectors are often unpatched Microsoft servers. So that's a well-known, huge vendor, right? That's not a small.
And I'm sorry, Nick. I probably know the least on this panel, so help me understand. Are we talking about Microsoft Office? Like what specifically in Microsoft?
So I'll get out of my depth really quickly too. But Microsoft has a whole server platform that a lot of the infrastructure sits on. It might be part of the application layer that runs part of the EMR. It could be part of the database layer, although increasingly those sit on a Unix platform. But that those Microsoft running servers, imagine we've all got XP or Windows 10 on our desktop. There is an equivalent for big rack-mounted servers.
Right.
And that has to be kept up to date pretty regularly. So that underlying operating system is the thing that seems to have a lot of the vulnerability.
And I want to follow up with what Aneesh just said. We see many more attacks in healthcare only because healthcare is required to report them as opposed to other industries that are not required to report them. And it was designed like this in order to let the people learn about the failures. But what is happening is we only learn about the incidents and not the root causes of those incidents. So you see, you go to OCR's wall of shame, see so many attacks happen, but I haven't learned anything from that. I don't know if you have learned anything from the failure of MedStar. And I think to use the potential of that learning curve and industry informing itself, both OCR and also the healthcare organizations and other entities in the healthcare system, which is not limited to healthcare organizations and their EMRs. There are business associates and insurance companies who have many times have access to much larger volumes of patient data and are not using certified or uncertified EMRs. To learn from these breaches, to learn the lessons that they learn from these breaches with each other, and unfortunately, it is not happening at the moment.
One thing I was struck by on that first panel, Congressman Hurd said that the hackers are learning from each other. These Russian hackers in some tower, they're sharing tactics and tips. The victims here in the United States, they don't have the same information sharing. How do we fix that?
Well, let me be precise about this. We do have a framework under NIST, the Commerce Department agency that is really the Switzerland for a lot of this information flow, to establish these industry verticals that are sharing. One of the big problems is, what are you sharing? So are you going to release personally identifiable information to share? hey, I got this email from Dan Diamond, and man, that guy sent me some crazy things.
You keep using my name. Is someone sharing my information with you?
Right. And so I get the email from Dan. I'm like, hey, Dan, hey, Aneesh, I'd like you to prepare to the panel today. Click my link. And I click it. Now that was an infected piece of, that email contained a link that had installed some malicious software on my computer. How do I share that email with others without violating your privacy in order to learn how did that particular piece of malware get onto your spoofed email? And so getting the privacy right has been the central debate in information sharing, which Congress now has moved forward on this framework for, the goal is to minimize PII while maximizing the sharing and learning across many industry verticals. So we're not perfect in healthcare, but we have at least a model to say, how do we ensure that these threat vectors are shared? Now, in the first term for the Obama administration, we were at a cloud-first policy, in part because patching is a human failure. Right? It's not Microsoft's fault you didn't patch. You got to push the button and patch. So the staff has got to, maybe they have some burden, but the premise is, part of the reason I was enamored with the idea of cloud is, in many ways, you auto-patch in bulk. So you get the threat vector at 3 p.m. on a Monday afternoon. You learned a new signature. You figured out it came from this domain with this apparatus. You sort of incorporate that into the feedback loops. The next time it shows up to an entity that's in the same cloud environment, you stop it before even it's presented to him to click. And so this learning, real-time learning, I think is the opportunity that's coming. And we're stuck in the must-have servers on premise, and but then you got to bury the responsibility. If you're going to do all that infrastructure, you got to do it all the way. And I think it might lead to a further acceleration to the cloud.
So just want to open this back up. Outside in is the hashtag. If you have questions, please submit them. They'll get passed to me. I want to build off something you just said, Aneesh, and Nick, it sounded like you were about to jump in, so hopefully this question will tee you up. We're at this balance of protecting information, but also the need to share. This was your point. How do we make sure we strike that balance in a world where we're going to benefit from sharing health data for outcome insight, for making it easier for patients, but someone on the first panel, I think it was Clinton, said the way to protect data is really just put it all in a server in a bathtub and never let anyone see it. So what is the right answer moving forward to strike the right balance?
I'm going to make sure I get the right question too. So between sharing and
opening it up and locking it down.
Transportability and so I think my answer to that is a little bit of a different tack, Dan, and I would say that back to what I maybe teed up at the beginning, we're going to have to invest even more than we've invested today. We've built this incredible infrastructure around IT security. We have, in fact, in any community that I know where the community hospital is the largest employer, it's also the most advanced IT shop. They tend to be an anchor for people who want careers in IT, and that's an amazing thing. And so we continue to build in that infrastructure. And I think, Aneesh, to your point about do we keep building that locally or do we start to look at cloud-based services or other things, I would say that we're at that pivotal juncture where we've got to decide, do we keep investing more and start looking for the places where we've left the door open and we've got to board it over, we've got to put a guard in front of that door, where we realize that we've left our backside totally uncovered and people are kind of flanking us that way. I think that's a question. I think the other way of looking at it is, do we take that same amount of money and resources and put it in building something completely different? And my version of this is maybe where I'm a little bit contrarian, and I started and went before this conversation to a bunch of patient groups and said, what's your view on this? What would you want? And almost universally what I hear is, I want to own my own data. I want to decide who gets access to it. I have a Gmail account, and as far as I know, Google doesn't get hacked, but sometimes I sign up for a website and I say to that website, use Gmail or use Google as my username and password, so there's a mechanism for that. And I'm adding a couple layers of sophistication on top of some of the comments I heard, but my version of that is, if we want to start sharing things, instead of trying to patch what we've got or fix what we've got, what if we took that same amount of money and resources and built something entirely different? And that thing different would be putting the data back in the hands of the patients and letting them be the ones to share it and having an authorization mechanism for doing that.
Because right now it's so hard for some patients, they might as well just hack the system if they want to get their data.
Anybody with a misspent youth could probably, get their medical records faster that way than...
We're not endorsing that. offering that.
No, I
as
kind of
an
like this.
observation.
Especially because it's too easy to hack into these healthcare systems.
Well, your report touched on this, all of the different kinds of hackers that are out there, Niam, and some of them are malicious, and some of them are the misspent youth who are doing it on a dare or for fun. What are some of the commonalities around who is doing the hacking, and what can we learn from the patterns of hacking behavior?
Well, I interviewed 22 victims, and out of those 22, only 2 or 3 of them were real victims of hacking attacks. The rest were just goofy people who happened to, lose a laptop or a thumb drive or something like that. So I really don't think hacking happens as that much in the healthcare. It happens more than it should be, but not as much as we think it is happening, because I still cannot believe that the stories that I read in different news outlets claiming that medical data is worth $500 per record, because if that was true, and a community hospital has easily 1 million records, if I could hack into them and sell that data, $500 per record, it is $500 million. I will quit my job at Brookings right now and will go learn how to hack into these systems.
I'm sensing a theme in our panel. We're not endorsing this bad behavior,
Yes,
but point taken that it's a little overhyped potentially.
Yeah, so, but ransomware makes all the sense, because, and again, please pay attention that in these ransomware attacks, they're not touching your data. It's like somebody just changing the lock of your front door and doesn't let you get in.
Right.
They do not touch the things in your home. They're not stealing anything. They just tell you, hey, give us $15,000 or maybe $20,000 to let us get into your home. That's it. Because hackers themselves know that it's really difficult to monetize medical data. I mean, who cares about my blood test? Nobody. I mean, the only thing that they are after are my social security number and home address, date of birth, my personal information part of those health records, not the medical records. And they use that in order to create a fake identity or submit insurance claims and everything. And it is very difficult to scale that up. From a hacker's perspective, he may pay you $500 for one record, but he's not going to pay you $500 million for 1 million records, because it's very difficult for them to monetize.
Let me jump in. I see, Aneesh, you're nodding along. You agree with this assessment that it's not all about the medical information, it's about the social security numbers and...
Well, so here's the, it's hard to get in the mind because this is not well reported, but let's just take it. In 2010, the president said, I'm going to provide basically online access to patients in the VA to access their health records via blue button. Loads up the blue button, and 1 million veterans push the button and they access their data. Not a lot of widespread reports yet of people faking that they're a veteran in order to get another veteran's blue button file. Not yet. CMS follows suit. Maybe another 1 million people have downloaded their blue button file. Not a lot of evidence, or at least reported evidence, of people faking, okay? And on and on. Now, we then expanded the concept of buttons into different colors. Green button for energy, red button for, I thought it was red, and then we called it My Data for education. And then consumer financial data became the IRS Get Transcript. All of a sudden, the IRS Get Transcript, which now does have, in his point, the kind of the stuff you would reuse for economic gain, 23 million Americans downloaded their Get Transcript file. 200,000 plus have been publicly reported as having been spoofed hacker-like attempts. So it provides some evidence that the attack vector is for the data that has economic reuse and not so much the clinical values. And my perspective on that is a following hole in our current system. The average hospital or doctor does not know whether a machine is logging into the portal or a human. The internet economy has figured this thing out. There's a door for the machines and a door for the humans. And you have security that's commensurate with the request. If you want to get the machine door, the patient's got to authorize, the consumer's got to authorize it. So you got to do one more step than if a human just logs in. The great news about where we are in healthcare is that the Obama administration in November finalized the meaningful use rules for stage 3, which is now part of MACRA and all the other acronyms. So we've got a very clear view that there will now be a machine front door, a front door for machines that will be secure and would allow for a more thoughtful way of registering, so no one has to hack the account in order to pull their health record into something that Nick is describing that could help them make better decisions in the care system, but rather a thoughtful front door that they don't have to hack in to get their own data. And really the race is on. Protect the old patching of the old servers and the painful headache while turning on the systems that we're going to need to be successful in the value-based healthcare world. And that's the opening up while locking down conundrum, which I think the opening up is going to win, and we're going to spend a lot more time doing that than this.
We have a few minutes left. If you have a question, please raise your hand and we'll try and get a microphone to you. I've got one question while the microphones are going around.
Up on the back.
Thank you. You do my job better
I'm
than
sorry,
me.
You're part of the brotherhood.
I don't have a good quippy response to that. So we just heard from Aneesh a potential solution from government on way forward. Nick, Niam, what is the government intervention, or maybe lack of intervention, that you'd like to see? Understanding that the government might not always be helpful when getting into this space.
I want to be thoughtful about that because so many of the thought leaders and the people I learn from are part of our government leaders. I think from a legislative standpoint, I would want to not act too quickly because I think my numbers could be wrong here, but I think very, very few people in Congress identify as coming from a math and science background, and this is pretty heavy in the math and science front. And
Congressman Hurd might disagree with you, but I think
well, I
think
it's a small percentage compared to. I look at Feinstein-Burr as a bill, and that's a bill to me that does not understand cryptography at all. It would effectively ban a web browser, and so I would not want to rush down that path and find ourselves hamstrung by something. But I want to go back and so this is just ad hoc and on the spot and build off of your idea of a learning network and your idea that we don't understand the root cause of these things. So I'm sitting here saying, I think it's Microsoft servers that are unpatched. I'd love to connect those two things, and I'd love to see the government build some way to help do that. That seems like a neat role for them to be able to play.
Lowercase g convener.
I like that.
You like that?
Yeah.
All right.
Did you copyright that?
That's the role. That's NIST. NIST is the lowercase g in government that convenes the industry to solve and learn in varying forms. And so it was my favorite industry for collaboration because it didn't have the heavy hand of regulation, nor was it free for all, don't do anything, but it had a thoughtful method by which we could actually orchestrate the right answer in a way that really is at the heart of what our government was founded on, this notion of community and commonwealth.
I think the best that government can do is convening and bringing people together and inciting them to talk with each other and work on a problem. But expecting government to help with innovation and information technology is really foolish. We have seen the results of government intervention in healthcare information technology through meaningful use program, and we have seen it through HIPAA regulation. It has been a miserable failure in both areas. So I think we should not expect government to be able or capable of, solving this information technology problem. It has not been successful. 155 million Americans have their records out there. There have been victims of privacy breaches, and that is the lowest estimate because OCR only reports the breaches of more than 500 people. Per each of those large breaches, there are hundreds of smaller breaches that are not even reported. So I can comfortably say that all of our records have been out there. We all have been a victim of privacy breaches. And if government couldn't help one of us protect our privacy, then I personally do not expect it to be able to do anything better. So let the market do its job. In my last report, I lay out how cyber insurance market could potentially solve all of these problems that we have in the patient privacy and cybersecurity, and how those market-based solutions could be a long-lasting approach to solve the problem fundamentally.
As you were talking, I noticed the first panel nodding their heads or shaking their heads no. Just so you know, you may have
no.
Yeah.
If you want, I'd love to defend the meaningful use program. We've done a great deal. Could you imagine, before you answer this thing, just a simple question, the average doctor who was caring for a couple thousand patients could not figure out which patients whose got background or condition that may have a heart attack or hypertension, which of them have elevated blood pressure levels so that they need to be managed in a more aggressive way. We, as a country, could save 1 million heart attacks. Now, because of the method by which we've basically built up the program, every certified health IT system is capable of running that simple query. So Nick and his team can say, whoa, who are the 15 patients that we didn't know at risk of a heart attack? Let's go call them. Let's bring them in. Let's counsel them. Let's make it happen. So that's just a bitty little small thing. And I'll make one final comment. Cybersecurity insurance markets, you can't build an insurance market unless there's a standardized data model on which they can insure against. So you needed the government to help build standards to figure out what are the root causes of the problems on which then they could model the insurance policies to do it. So there is a yin to the yang. It's not entirely market alone, but I get the sentiment. I just want to correct the record where I can.
And a very provocative way to end the panel. If you disagree or agree with either one of our panels, you can find them in the lobby. For all of the, unfortunately, no more time for questions, but for all of those of you who joined us in the room, thank you very much. Those watching on the live stream, thank you too. A final thank you to Philips for bringing this together. It should be a compelling series. And make sure to join us for cocktails. Please drink responsibly. Do not share your medical information. Thank you, everyone.